again, man, you have a lot of action. I've played you on the show. I love your music, love what you're doing between Gregg Hill and what you're doing covering Gregg Hill. I'm looking forward to getting into it, so thank you for taking a minute out.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So let's begin our journey with this. 6 years ago, this pandemic did so much to change the way that we all lived, especially musicians. How did you get through that area, and how has it influenced the way that you create and do things today?
You know, uh, I guess I felt like maybe I had more time to focus on the music rather than, being as busy with being out there playing and teaching. But on the other hand, I can admit that, just like I was just saying at the beginning, that these opportunities, especially with Gregg and via Gregg with Randy Napoleon and Rodney Whitaker, and that 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 period of time ended up kind of, blossoming into what's happening now. And so I mean, I was grateful that I don't believe I got COVID to my knowledge, and that, definitely did the vaccinations though, to had some family members that really had a hard time with it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's strange because we were performing with this tap dancer group, Randazzo Tap Dancers Soulful of Rhythm is the name. I've been working with Sarah Randazzo, this tap dancer and choreographer, for about 30 years. And we were doing a concert downtown Ann Arbor the day that I think Bernie Sanders was giving a speech that day. But it just became completely apparent then, at that time in 2020, that that the pandemic was hitting and everything was changing.
Yeah. So let's flash forward to last year. You had two albums that came out. Talk to me a little bit about both of the albums and kind of just having a lot of material coming out.
Well, I mean, it's been a lot of work, but I've done this many times, given that I've produced my own recordings back to 1993 with a first recording that I put out called Monk's Modern Music. And the fact that it was more concentrated at this more recent times wasn't too bad, since I had kind of built up a lot of experience doing it. Uh, Being part of the, editing, mixing, and mastering process and all that was fun, as well as being involved with the artwork and, just checking on everything. uh, Now I'm kind of losing the essence, I feel, of your question. Um, I guess what I'm saying is that it all through the musical relationships that I've had now for a couple decades with some of these same people, and then their connections to Gregg, made for this really fertile, and, I guess I could say I didn't see it coming totally, but then when Gregg started talking to me more about, yeah, I want you to do some recordings of my music, in addition to what you've done on the other records. I will tell you that I also had another project come out, but I don't have the same type of ability to promote it that Gregg does, because I did the music of another friend of mine who's a great boogie woogie blues jazz player named Mark Braun. He goes by Mr. B around here. And there's been some other projects here and there that I've worked on at the same time, but these have been very primary to me, given that I got to you know choose the band, and although Gregg did have some says about that and who he was thinking about, but it's just been really rich in terms of, and concentrated. But again, I'm feeling pretty grateful that at this point in my life, I feel like I'm able to handle that in a way that, you know, goes still well with what my limited amount of teaching and and performing pretty regularly around southeastern Michigan.
You,
So again, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question
no,
right.
you are. No,
Okay.
you are. And it's interesting because I see so many people interpreting Gregg Hill's work. He's just been so prolific lately.
Yeah.
you
Mike
know?
D's, yeah, he's amazing with what he's done, and Rodney too, Rodney Whitaker, and Randy Napoleon. You might know his last one was the
Yeah.
five guitar choir, which I thought was excellent. We did a played at the Detroit Jazz Festival last year with that music as well. And yeah, it is. Greg has been. I think he might be working on some new stuff now too.
Cool.
But wow, with all the different artists that he works with too, it amazes me that he keeps up with all of it as well. But that's really been the gift of having this relationship and collaboration with him and these other artists.
So take me back to your beginnings. How did this journey into music, how did the journey into jazz begin and evolve into where you're at today?
Well, my both my parents are musicians. They're vocalists. My father is retired now. He was an opera singer. He sang with New York City Opera, taught at a lot of the major universities, including U of M, Michigan State, and Eastern Michigan. But he also then taught at USC for about a decade, and then after that in University of Arizona in Tucson. But while he was at USC, I grew up in Ann Arbor, so I was in already in an environment where my mother, who sang musical theater, but went into jazz music, big time, a jazz vocalist, and so that really influenced me. But my dad was as supportive about all of that, so I really did have a lot of support and influence in my younger years. And in Ann Arbor at the time where I went to school, we also had opportunities when I was in junior high to study under the leadership of Lewis Smith, who was the trumpeter who has two Blue Note records out. You know, Here Comes Lewis Smith and Smithville. They're classics. And this guy took a teaching job in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, where my mother also taught. And so I got to be in his junior high jazz band for 2 years, and it was really amazing because I was really knocked out by the fact that this guy could play so much trumpet. He was good friends with Dizzy Gillespie, and he played so much bebop. And the fact that I was so knocked out by that at a young age definitely said a lot to me about where I wanted to go with it. And in high school, we also had, for 1 year, I had a really good education here too that continued. But then I finished high school in California because my older brother and I wanted to get to know my dad a little bit more before we hopefully got the grades, which we did, and went to USC. And that was the first year of USC's jazz program. And so it was still being developed. But after 1 year of being out there, and at that time, in the mid 80s, fusion was getting big out there, but more straight ahead and bop and all that was kind of scarce. And I heard about the jazz club that had opened in Ann Arbor, and I decided to move back here. And that's not long after that, I got into the scene here. And I met Rodney Whitaker when he was 18. I was 20. We started doing duos in Ann Arbor. And then the owner of the jazz club here, Ron Brooks, who also recorded on Blue Note with the contemporary jazz quintet from Detroit. That's another interesting history there. But anyway, I got into the scene and immediately started getting work, and then come the early 90s, I got into the monk competition, and but that I was more into it more because I wanted to really study his music, even though that wasn't just what the competition was about. But it ended up turning up into my first recording with Rodney Whitaker and Greg Hutchinson that really got the attention of a lot of other musicians, including Wynton Marsalis. I got been able to work with him a few times as well, but it's more just that after that first recording, I kept trying to do it for the rest of my life. Basically, is keep recording with people of high caliber musicians and recording some of my own originals as well as arrangements on anything from standards to some Disney, and just having fun with it, basically But then again, like I said, starting to come around to recording with Randy Napoleon, who I've known since he was in like high school, going into college and all that. Again, kind of Ann Arbor connection that it all started again. I tried to think of the order of all these events, but it really felt like it started more with playing with Randy over at one of Gregg's condos and in-house performances, and then we did a recording there, and then Gregg's music started coming into the mix more, and Randy was having me on his records, and I ended up doing one with Rodney Whitaker because Bruce Barth couldn't make the gig because he was on Rodney's one of or two, maybe more. I can't keep track of all his records that he's done of Gregg's music because there's at least three of them, maybe four.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's all been very, it's been inspiring, and I've been very grateful to be a part of it because I've also been able to work with other musicians I really like Robert Hurst and Nate Wynn, who play together a lot because Nate is in Robert's band. And I came up also knowing Kareem Riggins and Ali Jackson and Dwight Adams, all these great musicians. And then this young saxophone player who was actually up at State when I was teaching up there. I taught up at Michigan State for 10 years from '01 to 2011. And then my wife got pretty ill and ended up passing away, which was pretty hard. But my son and and my stepdaughter and her family, we're all doing pretty good
Yeah.
uh, now. And I'm grateful for all of that. So it keeps going. And
Yeah.
I don't know what's in the cards for another recording or not yet. But this one is still just kind of getting out there, the latest one, Wake Up Call. And so now I'm here working as I do with a lot of different bands, as well as my own trio and sometimes, quartet. Uh, so I definitely move through a lot of repertoire, which
Yeah.
is cool in itself.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what's happening.
So, was it always a foregone conclusion that you were going to become a musician growing up with musician parents? That was it?
It wasn't because of they made me do it though.
Sure.
I was, yeah, it was really that I knew at a young age that this is what I wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
And I had their support too. And my younger brother also ended up getting a degree in music, but he lived in New York for a while and worked there as a bassist and all that. But he also, like my older brother, has quite a gift for computers and tech and coding and all that stuff. So both he and my older brother do that in their own separate ways. And my older brother had a little bit of music in his like musicianship, but I ended up being the one that kind of, just stuck with it
Yeah.
and kind of knew that from
Yeah.
my early, that's what I wanted to do anyway.
So, let me ask you this. What was the first live jazz show that you saw, or first live show early on that blew you away, that got lodged in your mind, that maybe influenced the way that you approach music or loved this art form?
I admit that it's going to be hard for me to nail down what the first one was because, you know, it goes back to like grade school for me,
Yeah.
being around my mom and other musicians that she was friends with. And of course, when went into seventh grade and hearing Lewis Smith play, but it was in that period where, they also had a student run organization at the U of M called Eclipse Jazz.
Yeah.
And they brought in Oscar Peterson and Ella Fitzgerald and Joe Pass at Hill Auditorium, where also Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea recorded some of their duo piano recordings.
Yeah.
I didn't get to see one of those concerts, but I did see McCoy Tyner both in a large hall. But I also saw him with his trio down at a really it's a fine restaurant that also had a nice piano and jazz musicians working there. So that was startling to me to hear that. And I saw Betty Carter at the same venue. And it was again because of them, this Eclipse Jazz entity bringing in all these. So I guess I can remember around that age, 12, 11, 12, 13, just being knocked out by getting to hear these great, some of the greatest of the greatest,
Yeah.
and wish that I had known more at that time, because I would have probably pursued trying to get to see some others that I didn't, I wasn't, old enough to really go out on my own or try to get to here, like Sonny Stitt or, others that were playing at Baker's Keyboard Lounge and even in Ann Arbor, because a friend of mine told me, yeah, I actually heard Sonny Stitt for the first time at the Michigan Union at the U of M campus. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
here we go again. And I met Dizzy Gillespie at the Bird of Paradise, but that was after in my 20s. And I was in a room with him and another trumpet player, and we're both looking at each other like, is this a dream or something? And he goes, can you believe this? And I'm like, no, this is something else. And Dizzy Gillespie said, a lot of good musicians from Michigan, you know. It has the history of, between New York and Chicago, and Duke Ellington used to take his band up to Idlewild, Michigan, which is right next to Baldwin, where my brother-in-law had a cottage. And anyway, all of that history, and that knowing that this is also one of the centers, Detroit and Michigan, that some of these great musicians came through. Charlie Parker came through here too, and Thelonious Monk and others. So I all of that just made me much more excited about being in an area where I could have some type of access to some of these great musicians and learn from them. I got to work with Marcus Belgrave and Don Walden, these older musicians that, really were quite the mentors. And again, that I guess I've done other things to make money too, but this is definitely my number one favorite, is being able to play music, record it, perform it, and then teaching is the strong second place
Yeah.
of rewarding experience.
So, what of these legends and luminaries that you played with, from Belgrave to Wynton Marsalis and Buster Williams and Whitaker and all these names, what did you learn from them, whether directly or indirectly, about this love of this art form known as jazz? And how have you transmuted that to teaching the young minds that are getting ready to enter this world?
I know that there are a lot of, well, not a lot, there are some major voices in the education area, including the great Barry Harris, who, said had a certain way of teaching that I've been learning more about in recent years with his whole approach to sixth diminished harmony. So I'm talking a little bit theory here, even though he said, well, we didn't deal with modes or, this kind of thing. We didn't call it a bebop scale. I'm fascinated by the theory, and I found that very exciting, not to be stuck in it or always thinking about it, but that it was basically like getting to know your colors like a painter, and how to combine them and how they go with, but you don't have to necessarily paint by the numbers, so to speak. And more importantly, when I came back from California and got to play at the jazz club, the Bird of Paradise, Ron Brooks, the way he played, and the drummers that he brought in especially like Randy Gillespie, who's a prof up at Michigan State now. Well, I met him in my 20s. And when I played with him and Ron, and this other drummer named George Davidson as well, who was well known in Detroit and played with a lot of greats, the way that they played, the swing was so deep to me that I mean, the way that swing felt, because swing has it can be very personal at different ways that it's being felt by drummers, bassists, pianists. I mean, all of us, the way you swing, because big bands can sometimes have a different, more. I'm trying to be careful how I say it. It just doesn't always feel as free as it can in some of the smaller groups. But again, that really depends on personnel. But that really had a big influence on me to get to play with these seasoned older musicians, who then really encouraged me and said, man, you're making it feel good. The swing is great. And So, I mean, the list does go on. What do I learn in that context? I'm getting some kind of affirmation that either I'm helping both with the rhythm and with the way to complement or comp with the others, even just with the rhythm section. And so they didn't always have to say a lot. It was the way that it felt, and then their reactions to it and the strength of it. It was really, it's like life changing events when the music connects up so strong that you're just left there going, "Wow, that I didn't know it could feel like that."
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, I think I guess it's everybody's different, but artists can be really consistent sometimes. Other times, maybe there's little waves of not being as consistent. At least that's how I felt about myself. But in general, when I get to play with musicians that have that kind of feel going on and that connection, it's beyond what you walk away saying, "Oh, I understand more." What you understand is in the moment, whether you're really connecting up and the other musicians are sharing the same center, that then nobody has to try to work anymore. And then comes the whole thing about really listening to each other and how you react again. And is it helping or is it maybe causing some type of interference? So that kind of stuff, again, it feels like, riding a bike or doing something athletic that at a certain point you got to not think about it too much
Yep.
and be able to feel it and then trust trust the force, so to speak.
That's right. It's all a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so let me ask you this. At the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, all these circles of people, family, friends, fans, everyone that's on the bandstand, students, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Actually, that's quite a question, and I'll try not to get out with that because I guess I'm someone who would like to have my own voice that consists of all the voices that I've been so influenced by and that I really love. And that can include some of the younger generations. But, when you are around a lot of musicians that seem to also be influenced by some of the same great artists and recordings that you have been, it already makes for a more likely type of connection. So who am I? Someone who wants to continue to play the music and attain more and more freedom for something that is, fluid in terms of ideas and the music. It's hard to say, well, I'm this or I'm that, when I'm also like, well, I've liked so much of the history of this music and the history of jazz piano. You can't be a master of all of it, let alone whether you even get good enough to be really good at some of it. Like the stride era coming out of, Art Tatum and, Thelonious Monk. But Thelonious Monk was the one that really showed so many wide open parameters with so much connectivity that also made me think, wow, I want to be like this in terms of composing and swinging in my time and making use of space and improvisation, because I also love Charlie Parker and Coltrane and Miles.
Yep.
So who am I? Someone who's wants to be able to play this music in a way that doesn't mean that I have to somehow define or identify myself. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That to be recognized both by touch or sound, and of course maybe things that I play. That's cool. You know what I mean? So I guess I try to be humble because I don't necessarily expect that I'm supposed to be thought of in a certain way. Instead, I'm just grateful that people respond positively. And now that I'm an older musician, kind of like one of the veterans too, I feel that mostly that kind of respect, the same kind that I have for my elders and for my contemporaries, and even for the younger generations, watching them deal with it. And some of them are, they're so good at a young age. It's not like it's never happened, but it's pretty startling, and it's great.
So if anybody wants to pick up your latest album, The Tribute or Wake Up Call, or catch you live, any of the good business in your world, where do they go?
Right now, we have a concert on May 17th in Ann Arbor at the Carytown Concert House for the music of Gregg Hill, Wake Up Call. Tribute, I've done several concerts in the last year or so. And I'm, like I was telling you before, I play so much different repertoire. I work with an Afro-Cuban band too, and I get to write and arrange for some of that. And I was working with a really great sextet recently for about the last couple years with all this classic material. So this is mostly in southeastern Michigan.
Yeah.
We did go up. I did go up and play a concert with Sean Dobbins, who's another one I work with a lot, a drummer who is a professor at the University of Indiana up in Traverse City. But to be honest, it's been a while since I've really done anything in terms of travel and touring of that, So I don't really do that much as a leader. So most of it is close to where I live in southeastern Michigan. And so there's another place called the Blue Llama Jazz Club in Ann Arbor. I work there frequently, both under my own leadership and with others. And like I was telling you earlier, I'm also working with a tap dance group, both sometimes piano, but then with bass and drums with my trio. And so basically that's what's on the calendar involving Gregg Hill's music. I might get something else this summer. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm also kind of trying to see if I might start working on another project of his music.
Cool. Well, I will put all these links in the show notes. Rick, it's great to catch up with you. I've played you on the show. I love your music. Thank you for your story. Thank you for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Neon Jazz.